and welcome to Crowvane Manor. Wherever you are, and whatever kind of night it's been, you've come to the right place to slow down. Let the world go quiet for a while. Out here, none of it needs your attention. Many of you return to these rooms night after night, and I'm grateful for that. There's a reason you keep coming back. The stories kept inside these walls aren't quite like the ones you'll hear anywhere else. Before we begin, leave a comment and tell me where in the world you're listening from tonight. I always enjoy reading them. And if these stories stay with you, a like and a subscribe help more than you know. Now get comfortable, breathe slow, and let's open the door together. When I was 8 years old, I had a lot of trouble sleeping in my own room. Our house was a townhouse that was already close to 100 years old. It had narrow hallways, tall ceilings, and wooden floors that creaked in different places throughout the building. Everyone in the family knew which boards made noise. There was one near the stairs that gave a sharp crack when someone stepped on it. Another outside my bedroom groaned slowly under even a little weight. At night, the house was full of those small sounds. Wood shifted. Pipes knocked inside the walls. The stairs occasionally creaked, even when no one seemed to be using them. My mother always said it was only an old house settling. During the day, I believed her. At night, every noise felt like footsteps. My bedroom was only a short distance from my mother's room. The walk between them could not have been more than 10 steps, but when the hallway was dark, it seemed much farther. I often woke and went to her room because I felt safer sleeping beside her. She was used to it. Sometimes she told me to return to my own bed. Other nights, if she was too tired to argue, she simply lifted the blanket and let me climb in. The night I remember most began the same way. I had gone to sleep in my room, but sometime later I opened my eyes. The digital clock showed 2:34 in the morning. I remember the exact time because the glowing numbers were one of the first things I looked at. The room was dark, and nothing obvious had woken me. I listened for a moment. The house was quiet. I could not hear voices, television, or movement from another room. There were only the ordinary nighttime sounds of the old building. Still, I did not want to remain alone. I got out of bed and walked to my mother's room. The floor creaked beneath me as I crossed the hallway. I knew the noises came from my own footsteps, but they still made me nervous. Her bedroom door was partly open. I went inside and stood beside the bed. "Can I sleep with you?" I asked. My mother answered in a tired voice. Yes, she barely woke. I walked around to the other side of the bed, climbed beneath the covers, and settled beside her. The warmth of the mattress and the sound of her breathing calmed me almost immediately. I fell asleep again. I do not know how much time passed before I woke for the second time. It was still dark outside. This time, I woke because I desperately needed to use the bathroom. The pressure in my bladder was so strong that I sat up quickly, ready to climb out of bed. I had not even placed my feet on the floor when I noticed someone standing beside my mother. At first, I thought another family member had entered the room. Then I saw her more clearly. She appeared to be an old woman. Her skin looked extremely pale, almost white in the darkness. She had curly red hair that framed her face and fell around her head in tight waves. The color looked strangely vivid despite the low light. She was holding a dark brown book. The book looked old and heavy, with a cover much darker than the wooden furniture around it. She held it open in both hands and appeared to be reading from its pages. A faint orange glow surrounded her. It was not bright enough to light the entire room. It seemed to radiate only a short distance from her body, outlining her face, hair, hands, and the book. The light did not look like moonlight or the glow of a lamp. It was soft and warm, but it made the scene more frightening rather than comforting. The woman also had wings. They rose behind her shoulders and extended outward, though I cannot remember every detail of their shape. They did not look like costume wings. They seemed attached to her. The orange glow touched their edges, making them visible against the darkness of the room. She stood over my mother's sleeping body. Her eyes were lowered toward the book. Her lips moved as she read. She was speaking in whispers. I could not understand the words. The sound was too low and seemed to blend into itself. It had the rhythm of someone reading a prayer or reciting something from memory. She was not speaking to my mother in a normal conversational way. It felt ceremonial, as though she were performing something over her. I remained sitting upright in bed. For a few seconds, I could not move. The need to use the bathroom disappeared beneath the fear. I stared at the woman, trying to decide whether I was awake. Her fingers held the edges of the book. Her mouth continued moving. The curls of her hair seemed real. The glow around her remained steady. Nothing about her looked like a shadow created by furniture. She was too detailed. I wanted to wake my mother. But the woman was standing so close to her that I was afraid to reach across the bed. I thought that if I touched my mother or called her name, the figure might do something. So I watched. The whispers continued. My mother remained asleep. She showed no sign that she could hear the woman reading above her. Her breathing stayed calm. She did not move away or open her eyes. The sight was terrifying, but it was also confusing. The woman did not appear angry. She was not raising a weapon or reaching toward my mother. She seemed focused on the book. Her face was serious, but not violent. Still, everything about her felt unnatural. An old woman with wings should not have been standing in our bedroom in the middle of the night. The orange light should not have been surrounding her. No stranger should have been whispering over my sleeping mother. I stared for several seconds. Then the woman noticed me. Her eyes lifted from the page. She looked directly at me. The room seemed to become even quieter. Her expression did not change dramatically. She did not look surprised to find me awake. It was almost as though she had known I was there the entire time and had simply chosen not to acknowledge me until that moment. She raised one finger to her lips. "Shh," she whispered. The sound was clear. Unlike the words she had been reading, I understood it perfectly. She was telling me to be quiet. Then she lowered her hand and returned her attention to the book. She continued reading over my mother. As soon as she said shh, I began sinking back beneath the blankets. I do not remember deciding to lie down. My body seemed to move on its own. I slowly lowered myself until my head touched the pillow. The covers rose around me. My eyes became heavy. I was still frightened. I wanted to stay awake and watch her. I wanted to wake my mother. But the moment I lay down, I fell asleep instantly. There was no period of trembling beneath the blanket, no waiting for the woman to leave. 1 second, I was staring at her. The next, everything was gone. When I opened my eyes again, it was morning. Sunlight filled the bedroom. Birds were chirping outside. My mother was still beside me. The woman was gone. There was no orange glow, no dark brown book, and no sign that anyone had been standing near the bed. The room looked completely normal. For a few seconds, I wondered whether the entire experience had been a dream. Then I remembered why I had originally woken. I had needed to use the bathroom so badly that I sat up immediately. But now I did not need to go at all. I checked the bed, expecting to discover that I had wet myself during the night. I had not. The blankets and mattress were dry. That confused me almost as much as the woman. The need to use the bathroom had felt urgent and physical. It had been the reason I woke and saw her. Yet by morning, it was gone. Maybe my body had simply absorbed the sensation into a dream. Perhaps I had never actually needed to go. Or maybe enough time passed after I fell asleep that the feeling naturally faded. I told my mother what I had seen. I described the pale old woman with curly red hair. I told her about the dark book, the orange glow, the wings, and the whispering. I explained that the woman had been standing over her. Then I told her how the figure looked at me, placed a finger to her mouth, and said, "Shh." My mother listened. She did not seem as frightened as I expected. She told me the woman was probably an angel. That explanation should have made me feel better. Angels were supposed to be good. They protected people. If the woman was an angel, perhaps she had been praying over my mother or watching over her while she slept. Maybe the book contained prayers, names, or something meant to keep her safe. The wings and orange glow fit the image of a supernatural guardian, but the experience had not felt comforting. It remained the scariest moment of my life. The woman may not have threatened me, but she had silenced me. The way I fell asleep immediately after she spoke did not feel normal. It felt as though her word had power. She did not ask me to return to sleep. She told me, and my body obeyed. For a long time afterward, I was even more afraid to sleep alone. Whenever I woke at night, I looked toward the corners of the room and the space beside the bed. I expected to see curly red hair illuminated by orange light. I sometimes wondered whether she visited my mother on other nights when I remained asleep. Maybe I had only seen her because I happened to wake at the wrong moment. Perhaps she had been there many times before. That thought made it difficult to decide whether I wanted to see her again. Part of me was curious. I wanted to know who she was. I wanted to ask what she had been reading and why she stood over my mother. Another part of me hoped she would never return. Even if she was an angel, I did not want to wake and find her watching us again. As I grew older, I began searching for ordinary explanations. The most obvious was that I had been dreaming. I had woken, walked into my mother's room, and fallen asleep beside her. Later, I may have experienced a vivid dream in which the real bedroom became part of the scene. The need to urinate could have entered the dream and caused me to sit up. My sleeping brain might have created the woman from religious images, stories, or pictures I had seen before. The wings and glow were familiar symbols. The red hair and brown book could have come from a movie, painting, or memory I no longer recognized. A false awakening could explain why everything felt so real. In a false awakening, a person dreams that they have woken in the actual room. They may see familiar furniture, family members, and surroundings with perfect detail. The dream can continue until they wake for real. If that happened, I never physically sat up. I never saw an actual figure. I only dreamed that I did. That explanation also accounts for how I fell asleep instantly after the woman told me to be quiet. I may never have been fully awake. The moment she said shh could have been the point when the dream changed or ended. The vanished need to use the bathroom also fits. Perhaps the physical pressure woke me, partially, but it was not as urgent as the dream made it seem. By morning, the sensation had passed. Another possibility is a hypnopompic hallucination. These can occur while a person is waking from sleep. The brain remains partly in a dream state, causing vivid images or sounds to appear in the real room. People may see figures standing beside the bed, hear voices, or sense a presence. The hallucination can look completely solid. I may have opened my eyes, seen the room, and projected the woman into it. I could still move, so it would not necessarily have been sleep paralysis. The old woman may have existed only for a few seconds while my brain transitioned between sleep and wakefulness. That is probably the most rational explanation, but the memory remains extremely clear. I remember the orange light against the room. I remember the shape of the book. I remember the whispers continuing before she noticed me. Most of all, I remember the way her eyes met mine. The contact felt direct. She did not behave like a random dream character. She reacted to my awareness. She saw that I was awake and instructed me not to disturb what she was doing. That interaction is one reason the experience has stayed with me. If I only saw a motionless woman, I might have accepted that she was a hallucination formed from shadows. But she acknowledged me. She raised her finger. She made a sound. Then she returned to reading as though my presence was a minor interruption. I have wondered whether the figure could have been a real person. Perhaps an older relative entered the room to pray over my mother. Maybe the wings were curtains, clothing, or shadows behind her. The orange glow could have come from a hallway light or a candle. Without my glasses, if I had needed them at that age, I might have misinterpreted her appearance. But no one in the family matched the woman I described. There was no reason for someone to enter the house at that hour and leave without explanation. A real person also could not have made me fall asleep instantly with one word, unless exhaustion and fear did that on their own. My mother's belief that it was an angel gave the event a gentler meaning. Maybe the woman was protecting her. Perhaps she was reading from a book of prayers. The fact that she did not harm either of us supports that idea. She could have frightened me simply because supernatural things are frightening when they appear in a bedroom, even if they are not dangerous. Traditional descriptions of angels are not always comforting. In religious stories, people often react with fear when they encounter them. The first message is frequently some form of "do not be afraid." My figure did not say that. She only told me to be silent. That difference still bothers me. If she wanted to reassure me, she could have smiled. She could have explained. She could have told me my mother was safe. Instead, she made sure I would not interrupt. I have sometimes wondered whether the book was about my mother. Maybe it contained her life, her prayers, or events that had not happened yet. Perhaps the woman was reading something over her because she needed help or protection at that moment. I do not know whether my mother was ill, struggling, or facing something difficult during that period. As a child, I would not have known every problem in her life. Maybe something was happening that adults kept from me. The woman's presence could have been connected to that. But that is only speculation. There is also no certainty that the figure was good. Wings and light do not automatically prove anything. Dreams borrow symbols. A frightening presence could appear beautiful or angelic. The woman's pale face, strange red hair, and whispered reading felt more unsettling than holy. She stood over someone who was unconscious and unable to respond. When she realized I could see her, she silenced me. That behavior can be interpreted as protection. It can also be interpreted as secrecy. I do not know which is correct. The experience never happened again. I did not see the old woman during another night at my mother's house. No book appeared in the bedroom. I never heard the same whispers. Nothing else confirmed that she had been real. That makes the dream explanation more likely. One intense sleep-related hallucination during childhood is entirely possible. Children have vivid imaginations, especially when they are already afraid of sleeping alone. The creaks and darkness of an old townhouse could easily influence a dream. Still, there are details that have never faded. The exact time of my first awakening. 2:34 in the morning. The short walk to my mother's bedroom. Her tired voice giving me permission to climb into bed. The urgent need to use the bathroom. The orange glow. The dark brown book. The woman's red curls. The wings behind her. And the finger pressed to her lips. When I think about whether I would want to speak to her now, I have mixed feelings. Part of me would ask who she was. I would ask why she was reading over my mother and what the book contained. I would want to know whether my mother had been in danger. I would ask why she chose to reveal herself to me. But another part of me remembers how powerless I felt. I was not invited into a conversation. The woman did not treat me like someone she wanted to meet. She gave me one instruction: be quiet. Then she sent me back to sleep, whether intentionally or not. Trying to contact something based on a childhood experience could also be risky emotionally. Even if nothing supernatural happened, searching for the figure through rituals or attempts at communication might make the memory more frightening. It could create new experiences from expectation, stress, dreams, or suggestion. I would rather hold on to the uncertainty than convince myself that every strange sound or dream is her returning. If the woman was truly an angel or guardian, she did not need my help finding me the first time. If she ever had a reason to return, perhaps she would. I do not know whether I believe that. I only know that I have never forgotten her. My mother's explanation was simple. She said it was an angel. Maybe she was right. Perhaps the old woman was watching over her, and the whispers were prayers. Maybe the orange glow was something peaceful that frightened me only because I was too young to understand it. But whenever I picture the scene, I do not feel peace. I see a pale figure leaning over my sleeping mother while reading words I was not meant to hear. I remember the red eyes of the digital clock from earlier in the night and the faint orange light filling the room. I remember trying to decide whether I should scream. Then, the woman looked at me. She placed one finger against her lips. Shh. I sank beneath the covers and lost consciousness before I could wake my mother. By morning, the woman was gone. I never discovered who she was. Maybe she was an angel. Maybe she was only a dream. But sometimes I still wonder why something sent to protect us would need to make sure I stayed silent. When I was around 13 or 14 years old, I had an experience in my neighborhood that I still cannot explain. It happened during the summer. One evening, I had been visiting a friend who lived farther up the street from me. Our neighborhood had been built on a hill, with the road sloping down past rows of houses on both sides. My house was the second one from the bottom. My friend lived much closer to the top, so getting home meant walking downhill for several minutes. It was already fairly late when I left. The sky was dark, the street was quiet, and most people had gone inside for the night. There were no children playing outside and very few cars passing through. I had walked that route many times before. I knew every driveway, yard, and shortcut. The neighborhood was full of children and teenagers, and we constantly cut between houses to move from one street to another. Seeing someone appear from between 2 yards was not unusual. That was exactly what happened when I was about halfway down the hill. A person stepped out of the shadows between 2 houses. They entered the street several yards ahead of me and began walking in the same direction I was going. At first, I did not think much about it. It could have been another teenager returning home. Maybe someone had cut through a backyard after visiting a friend. That happened all the time. The figure did not appear obviously threatening. They were simply walking downhill ahead of me. Still, for some reason, I immediately felt that I should keep my distance. I cannot explain why. The person had not looked at me. They had not spoken. They were not walking toward me or behaving aggressively, but something inside me said not to get close. I slowed down enough to keep about 2 houses between us. Whenever the figure moved farther ahead, I continued at my normal pace. If I felt I was getting too close, I slowed again. I also kept watching them. The streetlights were not bright enough for me to see clear details. I could not identify the person's face, clothing, age, or gender. They appeared mostly as a dark human shape moving through the weak light. Their pace was steady, not hurried, not unusually slow. They walked like anyone else heading home. What bothered me was that they never looked back. My footsteps should have been easy to hear. The street was quiet, and I was walking only a short distance behind them. Even if they had not heard me at first, they should have noticed eventually. Most people would glance over their shoulder after hearing someone walking behind them at night. The figure did not react at all. They never turned their head. They never changed pace. They seemed either completely unaware of me or completely uninterested in checking who was there. I told myself that was fine. Maybe they had headphones on. Maybe they already knew I was behind them and did not care. Perhaps it was someone from the neighborhood who recognized my footsteps or had seen me before stepping into the road. There were plenty of normal explanations. Still, the uneasy feeling remained. I continued following at a distance. As we moved farther down the hill, I started thinking about home. It was common for people in our neighborhood to leave their garage doors open, especially during summer. My family sometimes did the same. When I left from my friend's house earlier that day, I had left our garage door raised. However, I had locked the interior door connecting the garage to the house. That door was solid and could only be opened with a key from outside. Even with the garage exposed, no one should have been able to enter the living area. My mother was expected home before me. As I approached the lower part of the hill, I saw that she had arrived. Our garage door was still open, and the garage light had been switched on. My mother's car was parked inside. Seeing the light normally made me feel safe. It meant she knew I was still out and had left the garage illuminated so I could see when I came home. I was about 3 houses away when the figure ahead of me reached my driveway. Until then, I assumed they would continue walking down the street. There was no reason for them to stop at my house. I did not recognize them. They had not spoken to me. They had simply happened to be walking in the same direction. Then, without slowing first, the figure turned sharply to the right. They walked up my driveway. Their pace became faster. Not quite a run, but a brisk and purposeful walk. Before I had time to call out, they entered my garage. My fear changed immediately. The vague uneasiness disappeared and became a clear, practical thought. Someone was trying to break into our house. My mother was inside alone. The stranger may have seen the open garage and decided it was an easy entrance. Even though the interior door was locked, they could try forcing it open or hiding inside until someone came out. I began running. The distance between us had been about 2 houses for most of the walk, but by then I was only a few properties away. I sprinted down the final section of the street and turned into the driveway. I expected to find the stranger at the interior door. Maybe they would be pulling on the handle. Perhaps they had hidden behind my mother's car when they heard me running. I was ready to shout for my mother or run to a neighbor if necessary. I entered the garage. It was empty. My mother's car was there. The overhead light filled the entire space. There were no dark corners large enough for someone to disappear into without being seen. I looked toward the interior door. No one was standing near it. I looked behind me toward the driveway. No one had come back out. The figure had entered the garage only seconds before me. There had not been enough time for them to leave unnoticed. I ran to the door leading into the house and checked the handle. It was still locked. The person could not have gone inside. I had been certain of that, but I checked anyway. The lock had not been broken or damaged. The door was fully secured. That left only the garage. I began searching. I looked around the sides of my mother's car. No one. I bent down and checked underneath it. There was not enough space for a person to hide comfortably, but I looked anyway. The concrete floor was completely visible. I checked through the car windows in case someone had somehow opened a door and climbed inside. The seats were empty. All the car doors appeared closed. There were no large cabinets, storage rooms, or secondary exits in the garage. The only ways out were the open driveway and the locked door to the house. The figure had not passed me on the driveway. They had not run through the backyard because there was no connecting doorway from that part of the garage. They had walked in and vanished. I stood there, trying to understand what I had seen. Maybe the person had never entered the garage. Perhaps they turned into the yard beside our house, and the darkness made it seem like they went inside. But I had watched them walk directly up the center of the driveway. The garage light illuminated them as they crossed the entrance. I saw their body pass into the garage. There was no uncertainty at the time. I had been close enough to believe my mother was in danger. Another possibility was that the figure had left immediately after entering. Maybe they saw the locked door, turned around, and ran back out while I was approaching. But I had kept my eyes on the driveway as I ran. There was nowhere else for them to go. If they had come back out, I would have seen them. I unlocked the interior door and rushed into the house. My mother was sitting in the living room, watching television. She looked completely relaxed. Nothing appeared disturbed. I asked whether anyone had come into the house. She turned toward me and stared as though the question made no sense. "No," she said. I asked again. Had someone knocked? Had she heard anything in the garage? Had anyone opened the door or tried the handle? She said no. She had been alone. I started explaining what had happened. I told her about leaving my friend's house and walking down the hill. I described the figure stepping out from between 2 yards. I said I had followed it for several blocks while keeping my distance. Then I explained that it had turned into our driveway and walked directly into the open garage. I told her I had run after it because I thought someone was trying to break in. But when I reached the garage, no one was there. The interior door was still locked. No one was inside her car or hiding beneath it. The figure had disappeared. My mother did not laugh. That was important. In some families, an adult might immediately dismiss the story as a frightened child misreading shadows. My family is Jamaican, and beliefs about spirits were taken seriously. We grew up hearing about duppies. A duppy is generally understood as a spirit of the dead, though stories about them vary. Some are said to wander at night, follow people, enter homes, or take on shapes that are almost human. Whether every family member believed every story did not matter. The possibility of encountering something spiritual was not treated as completely ridiculous. My mother's expression changed as I spoke. She stopped paying attention to the television. She asked me to explain again exactly where I had seen the figure and what it had done. I told her it never turned around. I told her I could not see a face. I told her it walked steadily until it reached our house, then suddenly entered the garage. She asked whether I was sure it had not gone into a neighbor's yard. I said I was sure. The garage light was on. I had watched it cross into the illuminated space. My mother stood up. That same night, she began praying over the house. She also burned sage and moved through the rooms, treating what I had seen as something that might have followed me home. She did not wait until morning. She did not tell me to forget about it. She wanted the house cleansed immediately. Watching her reaction made the experience feel even more real. Until then, part of me had still hoped she would offer an easy explanation. Maybe she knew a neighbor who matched the figure. Perhaps someone had come by just before I arrived. She might have said she heard a person in the driveway who then walked away. Instead, she behaved as though something had entered the property with me. I stayed close while she prayed. The garage door was closed. The interior door remained locked. Every window and entrance was checked. Nothing else happened that night. There were no footsteps in the garage, no knocks on the door, no shadow appeared in the hallway. Eventually, the house became quiet again. But I could not stop replaying the walk. The more I thought about it, the stranger it seemed. The figure had emerged halfway between my friend's house and mine. It had walked ahead of me at exactly the right pace to maintain a distance. It never checked whether I was still following. It did not hesitate at intersections or look at house numbers. It moved as though it already knew where it was going. Then it entered my garage. Not another open garage. Mine. There were other houses along the street where it could have turned. It chose the second house from the bottom of the hill, the same house where I lived. Sometimes I wonder whether it was leading me home. At the time, I assumed I was following it by coincidence. But the figure appeared in front of me and remained there for most of the walk. It may have known I was behind it. Perhaps it never needed to look back. That thought still unsettles me. The rational explanation is that I saw a real person. They may have been a teenager from the neighborhood. They stepped out from between two houses, walked downhill, and entered my driveway for some normal reason. Maybe they realized they had chosen the wrong house and quickly moved into the yard before I arrived. Perhaps there was a route beside the garage that I failed to see them take. Memory from that age is not perfect. The event happened quickly, and fear may have made the garage seem emptier or the timing shorter than it really was. I have considered all of that. But I knew the layout of my own house. There was no hidden door inside the garage. There was no passage behind the car. The figure would have needed to cross the open driveway again to leave. I was running directly toward it. I should have seen them. Maybe the figure hid behind the car, then slipped away while I checked the interior door. But I searched the car almost immediately. I looked on both sides, through the windows, and underneath it. A person could not have moved around me in that bright space without being noticed. It is also possible that what I followed was only a collection of shadows. Streetlights on a hill can create confusing shapes. A tree or fence might appear to move as someone walks. My own eyes could have interpreted unrelated shadows as one continuous person. But the figure stepped from between 2 yards. It walked for several houses. Then, it turned up my driveway. Its movements were human and controlled. I did not see a vague shape drifting along the road. I saw someone walking. Another possibility is that it was a neighbor who entered the garage before realizing I was behind them. Maybe they knew my mother and had come to speak with her. When they found the door locked, they could have left so quickly that I missed them. But my mother had not invited anyone over. No one mentioned stopping by, and the person never called out or knocked. They simply disappeared. My mother believed the safest response was to treat it as a duppy. Growing up with those beliefs gave the experience a name, but not a complete explanation. If it was a spirit, why did it appear to me? Why did it walk toward our house? Did it come from one of the yards? Had it been waiting near my friend's street? Was it following me, or had I unknowingly followed it? I have never answered those questions. I also wonder whether leaving the garage door open mattered. The entrance was brightly lit and completely exposed. Maybe the figure entered because the open door looked like an invitation. My family often left it raised without any problem, but after that night I became much more cautious. An open garage no longer looked harmless. It looked like a wide doorway into the house. Even though the interior door was locked, the garage still felt like part of our home. Whatever I saw had crossed onto our property. That alone was enough to make my mother cleanse the entire house. For a long time afterward, I watched the street whenever I walked home at night. If someone appeared ahead of me, I crossed to the other side or slowed down. I paid close attention to their footsteps and waited for them to look back. Most people did. They would glance over a shoulder, notice me, and continue walking. That ordinary reaction reassured me. The figure from that night had never behaved like someone aware of another person nearby. It walked with a strange certainty. No curiosity, no nervousness, no reaction to my footsteps. only forward movement. Sometimes I tried to remember whether its feet actually touched the ground. At the time, I believed it was walking normally. Years later, doubt changed parts of the memory. Maybe its steps were too smooth. Perhaps I never heard its shoes striking the pavement, but I do not want to add details that may not have been there. What I know is that I saw a human-shaped figure moving down the hill. I know it turned into my driveway. I know it entered the garage. And I know it was not there when I arrived seconds later. That is enough. Nothing similar happened to me again in that neighborhood. I never saw the same figure emerge from the yards. No one else in my family reported seeing a stranger vanish in the garage. The cleansing and prayers may have had nothing to do with that. Perhaps there was never anything supernatural in the first place. But my mother took no chances. Her certainty stayed with me almost as strongly as the encounter. She knew the neighborhood. She knew people sometimes cut through yards. She could have dismissed the figure as a local teenager. Instead, she immediately treated the house as though something unwanted had crossed the threshold. I have told the story to people who believe I saw a spirit. Others think I frightened myself after following a stranger at night. Both reactions make sense. I cannot prove what happened. There was no camera in the driveway. No footprints. No witness beside me. Only my mother saw how frightened I was after I came inside. Sometimes I wish there had been security footage. Maybe it would show a normal person slipping around the side of the house. That would settle everything. Or perhaps the recording would show me running into an empty garage after nothing at all. That would be disturbing in a different way. The possibility I think about most is what the figure might have done if I had not chased it. I ran because I believed my mother was in danger. But what if I had stayed on the street? Would the figure have remained in the garage? Would it have tried the locked door? Would my mother have heard something outside? Maybe it disappeared only because I followed. Or maybe it wanted me to run after it. It had walked ahead of me for several minutes, maintaining enough distance to keep me watching. Then it entered the one place guaranteed to make me chase. My home. My mother was inside. There was no way I could ignore it. That makes me wonder whether reaching the garage was not the end of the encounter. Maybe getting me to follow it all the way there was the point. I still do not know whether I saw a duppy, a living person, or a trick of darkness on an empty summer street. I only know that the figure came out from between 2 yards and walked ahead of me without ever looking back. It passed house after house until it reached mine. Then it turned into the light, entered the garage, and vanished from a room with no other way out. My mother prayed over the house before we went to sleep. For the rest of the night, I kept thinking about the 2-house distance I had maintained between us. At first, I believed I had kept that distance because I did not trust the figure. Later, I began wondering whether the figure had been the one keeping its distance from me, just close enough for me to follow it home. Here is the full rewrite, kept close to the original encounter while strengthening the atmosphere, the strange shape of the object, and the uncertainty that has followed you into adulthood. When I was around 11 or 12 years old, I saw something in the sky that I still cannot explain. I am 23 now, and I have only told 2 or 3 people about it. The main reason I kept it to myself was that I knew how the story sounded. I was a child when it happened. There was no photograph, and I never learned the name of the other person who saw it with me. If I told the wrong person, they would probably think I was lying, remembering a dream, or trying to make an ordinary object sound mysterious. I understand why. If someone else told me the same story, I would immediately begin looking for a normal explanation too. A balloon, a model aircraft, a remote-controlled toy, some kind of decoration carried by the wind. I have considered all of those possibilities for years. I genuinely hope it was something ordinary, but I remember how close it was. I remember the shape, and I remember the way it moved directly above us. At the time, I was living in eastern North Carolina. It was summer, probably June or July, when the weather was hot and the days seemed to last forever. My mother and I were visiting one of my aunts. She lived across the street from a trailer park. I had been there before, and I do not remember anything unusual about the area. It was a normal residential place with mobile homes, narrow roads, parked cars, small yards, and children spending time outside because school was out. At some point during the visit, I went across the street and met another kid. I cannot remember his name now. That bothers me because he was the only other person who saw what happened. We may have met that same day, or perhaps I had played with him during earlier visits. The memory has become less clear with time. What I do remember is that we were playing soccer together. We were not looking at the sky. We were not talking about aliens or ghost stories. There was no reason for either of us to imagine anything strange. We were simply kicking a ball back and forth outside. The afternoon seemed ordinary. The air was warm, and the light was bright enough that whatever we saw could not have been a shadow or a distant shape hidden by darkness. We had probably been playing for a while when we heard a sound. I wish I could describe it more accurately. It has been so many years that the exact noise is one of the details I have lost. It was faint, but unusual enough that both of us noticed it. It sounded like something pushing through the air while spinning. Not a loud engine. Not the chopping noise of helicopter blades. It was softer than that. There may have been a low whirring or rushing quality to it, as though something was rotating quickly and forcing air away from itself. The sound made us look up. Directly above us was an object. It was extremely low. I would estimate that it was only 15 to 18 feet over our heads. I know childhood memories can distort distance, but it was close enough for me to see the design on its surface. It was not a tiny point in the sky. It was not something near the clouds. It was right there, above the place where we were standing. My first thought was not that it looked like a traditional flying saucer. It did not. It was shaped more like two ice cream cones joined together at their wide ends. The pointed ends faced away from each other. The center was wider, and the object narrowed toward both tips. The surface was not perfectly smooth. There were detailed curves, dips, or grooves running outward from the middle toward the points. It looked designed rather than naturally shaped. The object was a bright, shiny silver color. The sunlight reflected from it, but not so strongly that I could not look directly at it. Along the sides were squares of green and purple. At the time, I thought they looked like windows. They were arranged on the silver surface and appeared clearly different from the rest of the object. I cannot say whether they were actually transparent. I did not see anyone inside. They may have been painted panels, lights, stickers, or decorations, but to my 11 or 12-year-old mind, they looked like small colored windows. The object itself was not very large. I would guess it was around 4 feet tall from one pointed end to the other, though measuring something floating overhead is difficult. It was larger than a normal toy I would expect a child to carry, but much smaller than an aircraft. That size is one reason I have always wondered whether it was some kind of experimental model or remote-controlled device. What made it so strange was the way it moved. It floated very slowly. There were no wings, no visible propellers, no balloon or string. I could not see anything supporting it. It moved forward while rotating. But the rotation was not smooth. It looked slightly unstable, like a spinning top when it begins losing speed. The object would rotate and wobble at the same time. Its center remained suspended in the air, but the pointed ends seemed to shift slightly as it spun. It did not appear to be falling. It did not rise or suddenly drop. It traveled steadily forward while making that uneven, almost tired-looking rotation. The movement is one of the clearest parts of the memory. It did not behave like a bird. It did not drift randomly like a balloon. It did not move quickly or smoothly like the aircraft I knew. It seemed mechanical, but unlike any machine I had seen before. The other kid and I stopped playing completely. The soccer ball was forgotten. Neither of us shouted. We just stared upward. The object passed almost directly over us. Because it moved so slowly, we had time to look at it. I remember following it with my eyes and turning my body as it traveled past. I kept waiting to see something familiar. A wire, a propeller, a person controlling it from a nearby yard. Nothing became visible. The object continued toward a group of trees. It did not speed up. It did not react to us. There was no beam of light or dramatic sound. It simply floated away, rotating and wobbling. Then it disappeared among or behind the trees. For several seconds, neither of us said anything. We looked at each other. His expression seemed as confused as I felt. That moment is important to me because it tells me I was not the only person who noticed it. Whatever the object was, the other child saw it too. I did not point at an empty patch of sky and convince him something was there. We both heard the sound. We both looked up. We both watched the same object move away. But we did not discuss it much. I do not remember either of us running after it. We did not go searching through the trees. We did not call adults over immediately. Maybe we were too surprised to know what to do. Children do not always respond logically to strange events. Sometimes something happens, you stare at it, and then you simply continue with your day because you have no idea how important it is supposed to be. I left not long afterward. I did not tell my mother or aunt what we had seen. I have asked myself many times why I stayed silent. Maybe I believed they would laugh. Perhaps I did not have the words to describe it. Saying that a silver object shaped like two ice cream cones had floated over us would have sounded ridiculous, even to me. I may also have decided it was a toy. If it was only something another child was playing with, there was no reason to create a big story around it. That became the explanation I carried for years. It was probably a toy. Maybe someone in the trailer park owned an unusual remote-controlled aircraft. Perhaps it was a handmade model. The green and purple squares could have been decorative tape. The wobbling movement may have come from an unstable motor. The soft spinning sound could have been small propellers hidden inside the design. That explanation is possible. The problem is the time period. This happened around 11 or 12 years before my current age of 23. Small drones and remote-controlled flying toys existed, but they were not as common or advanced as they are now. Most toy helicopters or planes had visible blades, wings, or familiar body shapes. They also tended to make loud buzzing sounds. The object I saw did not resemble those. A drone could hover and move slowly, but I do not remember seeing any exposed propellers. If the blades were hidden within the structure, it would have been a very unusual design. And why would it be shaped like two cones joined together? Maybe it was a balloon? A metallic party balloon could be silver, decorated with colored squares and carried by the wind. If it had partially deflated, it might wobble or rotate as it traveled. That is one of the strongest ordinary explanations. But the object seemed solid. Its shape held together perfectly. It did not bend, fold, or change as it moved. A balloon would also have been controlled mostly by the wind. This object appeared to travel in a steady direction while maintaining its height. I do not remember the trees or grass moving enough to suggest a strong wind. There was also the sound. Balloons do not normally create a clear spinning noise as they pass overhead. It may have been a kite. A strange homemade kite could have rotated in the air and displayed colored panels. The string might have been too thin to see. Someone could have been standing far away, controlling it from behind the trailers or trees. But it was directly above us and extremely low. A kite moving at that height would require a visible angle in the string, especially if the person controlling it were some distance away. We saw nothing. The object also seemed to travel independently, rather than being pulled or held in one area by a line. I have wondered whether it was a piece of machinery attached to a cable. Maybe workers were using equipment nearby. A suspended object could move slowly and wobble while being lifted. But there was no crane, no construction site, no vehicle making noise. The area looked normal. It could have been a strange bird viewed incorrectly. Large birds sometimes glide silently and can appear unfamiliar from below. But this thing was silver, symmetrical, and covered with clear green and purple squares. It rotated around itself. No bird could match what I remember. Another possibility is that the memory changed over time. That may be the most likely answer. I was young. I did not write down the details immediately. I told almost no one. Each time I replayed the event in my head, the image may have become sharper in some places and less accurate in others. Maybe the object was farther away than I remember. Perhaps it was much smaller. The colored squares might have been reflections. The cone shape could have been created by the angle from which I saw an ordinary balloon or kite. The wobbling motion may have seemed more controlled than it really was. Memory is not a video recording. It fills gaps, combines details, and changes as years pass. I accept that. There are parts I have already forgotten. I cannot remember the exact sound. I cannot remember the kid's name. I cannot remember what happened during the rest of the day. I do not know whether the sky was perfectly clear or partly cloudy. Those missing details make me cautious about claiming the object was anything extraordinary. But the central image has remained the same. Two pointed ends, a wider center, shiny silver metal, green and purple squares, slow rotation, a slight wobble, low enough to feel as though I could almost reach it. I have tried searching my memory for a logo or marking. I do not remember any writing. There were no numbers or symbols I could recognize. The surface had those intricate dips and curves running from the center toward the points, but I cannot reproduce them exactly. They were more detailed than simple lines painted onto the object. They seemed to be part of its structure. Sometimes I wish I had drawn it immediately. Even a child's sketch would help me compare the memory with known toys, drones, balloons, or model aircraft from that period. Now, every mental image is filtered through more than a decade of questioning. I also wish I had spoken to the other kid afterward. He might remember something I have forgotten. Maybe he knew exactly what it was. Perhaps someone in his family owned the object. He may have gone home later and learned that it was a toy launched by a neighbor. If I knew his name, I might be able to ask. But that part of the memory is gone. He remains only another child standing beside me, looking upward. His reaction is one reason I do not believe the entire thing was imagined. He stopped when I stopped. He looked at the same place. He followed the object as it moved toward the trees. After it disappeared, we stared at each other because neither of us knew what to say. There was a shared understanding that we had seen something unusual. I do not remember fear being my strongest emotion. I was confused more than terrified. The object did not threaten us. It did not descend or chase us. Nothing emerged from it. It passed overhead at a slow pace and continued on its way. The strangeness came from how close it was and how impossible it was to identify. If it had been high in the sky, I could dismiss it as a plane, helicopter, balloon, or distant trick of light. At 15 to 18 feet, it should have been easy to understand. Instead, being close made it harder to explain. I could see too much for it to become familiar. The event has also made me wonder whether it may have been part of a larger object. Could it have been a device that had separated from something else? Maybe it was a sensor, small surveillance platform, or experimental machine. Eastern North Carolina has military activity, aviation, and research facilities in different areas. But I have no evidence connecting the object to any of that. It is only speculation. Even if it were military or experimental technology, flying such a device at head height over children in a residential area would be strange. There was no one monitoring it that we could see. It seemed almost too small and decorative to be serious equipment. The green and purple squares gave it a toy-like appearance. That is why I continue hoping a toy is the answer. A toy would mean nothing impossible happened. Someone built an unusual flying device, lost control of it, and it drifted over us. The owner may have recovered it after it entered the trees. We never saw them because we left too soon. That scenario is entirely believable. I just have never found an example of a toy that matches what I remember. The shape is too specific. Two cones joined at the widest point. Curved grooves running toward the tips. Colored square panels. A slow wobbling spin while moving steadily through the air. If such a toy existed, it must have been rare or homemade. For years, I avoided calling it a UFO because that word immediately makes people think of aliens. But UFO only means an unidentified flying object. That is exactly what it was to me. Something flew overhead, and I could not identify it. I am not claiming there were creatures inside. I am not saying it came from another planet. I do not know what it was. The fact that I cannot explain it does not make the most dramatic explanation correct. It only means the ordinary explanation has remained hidden from me. Still, there are nights when I think about how quietly it appeared. We heard the faint sound only when it was already close. If we had been talking louder or focused more intensely on the game, we might never have looked up. It would have passed directly over us without being noticed. That makes me wonder how many strange things people fail to see because they never happen to look in the right direction. I also think about where it went. The trees were not far away. The object floated toward them and disappeared from view. Did it land? Did it continue through the branches? Did someone collect it? A 4-foot object moving at that height should have struck the trees unless it changed direction. We did not see it rise. Maybe the land sloped downward beyond the tree line, allowing it to continue without hitting anything. Maybe it stopped there. If we had followed it, perhaps we would have found it caught in a branch like a balloon or kite. That would have solved the mystery. But we did not follow. We were children, and whatever courage or curiosity we had disappeared once it was out of sight. The memory now feels incomplete because there was no ending. The object entered the trees. The other child and I looked at each other. Then, life continued. No adults gathered outside. No news report appeared. No military vehicles arrived. Nothing happened that confirmed the event mattered. Only the memory remained. Sometimes I question whether I saw it for as long as I think. It may have passed in 5 or 10 seconds. The slow movement and surprise could have stretched the moment in my mind. But even a few seconds would have been enough at that distance. I remember examining it rather than only glimpsing it. I had time to notice the silver surface, the colored squares, and the uneven rotation. It was not gone before my mind could form an image. That image has survived even as surrounding details faded. I have told only a few people because I do not want to argue about it. I cannot prove anything. I do not want someone telling me I definitely saw aliens, because I do not believe I know that. I also do not want someone calling me a liar because the story sounds unusual. I gain nothing from inventing it. There is no dramatic ending, no abduction, and no message from another world. It was only an object. It floated above two children playing soccer. Then it moved into the trees. Maybe one day I will see a photograph of an old toy, advertising balloon, or experimental drone and recognize it immediately. I hope that happens. I would rather have a simple answer than spend the rest of my life wondering. Until then, I can only describe what I remember. It was summer in eastern North Carolina. I was 11 or 12 years old. Another kid and I heard something spinning through the air and looked up. About 15 feet above us was a shiny silver object shaped like two ice cream cones joined together. It had green and purple squares on its sides. It rotated with a slow, uneven wobble. Then it floated away into the trees. The other kids saw it too. Neither of us knew what it was. And more than a decade later, I still hope it was only a toy. Forgive me for stepping in for just a moment. If you've only recently found your way here, then welcome. I'm glad you came. If these stories are keeping you company tonight, consider subscribing to Crowvane Manor. New stories arrive here often, the kind that stay with you long after the night is over. And if you tap the bell, you won't have to go looking. The next one will find you on its own. Thank you for being here. Now, let's return to where we left off. I was living in New Orleans not long after Hurricane Katrina when this happened. The city was still recovering, and everything felt slightly unsettled. Some streets looked normal again, while others still carried obvious damage. Houses stood empty beside occupied ones. Construction crews worked during the day, and at night certain neighborhoods became unusually quiet. I was renting a small house with off-street parking. There was a driveway running along the side of the house and a gate that opened into the backyard. Since that entrance was closer to where I parked, I usually went through the gate instead of using the front door. I had lived there long enough for the routine to become automatic. Park the car. Walk toward the gate. Open it. Cross the backyard and enter through the back of the house. One afternoon, I came home after drinking during the day. I was not completely out of control, but I was tired, buzzed, and in no mood to deal with anything unpleasant. As I approached the gate, I noticed a dead rat lying directly in front of it. It was not unusual to see rats in New Orleans, especially during that period. The storm and flooding had disturbed animals throughout the city, and many buildings still had damage that made it easy for pests to get inside. A dead rat was disgusting, but it was not unbelievable. I stopped for a second and looked down at it. My immediate thought was that I needed to get rid of it. Then I decided I could deal with it later. I was tired, slightly drunk, and wanted to go inside. So I stepped over it. As I lifted my foot, I noticed something beneath the body. The rat was lying in the exact center of a chalk circle. There were more chalk markings inside the circle. They formed some kind of diagram underneath and around the rat. I could not tell what it represented. There may have been lines, symbols, or shapes crossing through the circle. Whatever it was, it did not look accidental. Someone had deliberately drawn it on the ground and placed the dead animal in the middle. I stood there staring down at it. Even in my day drinking state, I understood that the scene was strange. The rat had not simply died beside the gate. Someone appeared to have arranged it. But I did not want to examine it closely. I did not want to touch it. And I definitely did not want to spend the afternoon wondering whether someone had left it there as part of a ritual, a threat, or some kind of joke. My brain responded with something like, "That's odd. I'm just not going to think about it right now." I stepped through the gate and went inside. Once I was in the house, I forgot about the rat surprisingly quickly. I drank some water, probably ate something, and decided to lie down. The alcohol and the heat had made me exhausted. I went to sleep. At some point during the nap, I woke to someone pounding on my front door. This was not a light, polite knock. It was aggressive enough to pull me out of sleep immediately. For a few seconds, I did not know what time it was or where the sound was coming from. Then, the knocking came again. Someone wanted me to answer. I got out of bed and walked toward the front of the house. I did not check through a window first. I was still groggy, and I assumed it might be a neighbor, a delivery person, or someone looking for help. I opened the door. A woman was standing outside. Her appearance is still one of the clearest parts of the memory. She had thick black hair that looked greasy and tangled. It hung down around her face in heavy strands, almost as though it had been wet and allowed to dry without being brushed. Much of her face was hidden. She looked at me through the hair. There was something immediately disturbing about her expression. She did not greet me. She did not apologize for waking me. She simply said, "I need to speak to John." Her voice was serious and direct. I waited for her to give me more information. Maybe John was a previous tenant. Perhaps she had the wrong address. I did not know anyone named John who lived nearby, and no one by that name was staying with me. At that point in my life, I could not even think of a close friend named John who might have given someone my address. I told her the truth. I don't know anyone named John. There isn't a John here. Her face changed. She gave me an angry look through the strands of her hair. Then, she repeated herself. This time, her voice sounded lower and harsher. "I need to speak to John." It almost sounded like a growl. The way she said it made me feel as though I was refusing to let her see someone who was hiding inside. I looked past her, trying to determine whether anyone had come with her. No one else was standing in the yard. I did not see a car waiting at the curb. She appeared to be alone. I began wondering whether she was intoxicated, mentally unwell, or looking for trouble. Whatever the reason, I did not want her entering the house. I kept one hand on the door and said, "Honestly, there's no one named John here. I'm really sorry, but I can't help you." For a moment, she continued staring at me. Then, something in her expression shifted. The anger disappeared. Her posture changed. It was as though she had suddenly woken from a dream and realized where she was. She stepped back slightly from the doorway. "John's not here," she said. Her voice sounded completely different. It was calmer and uncertain. I repeated it carefully. "John's not here. I really wish I could help you, but I can't." She looked at me again. This time, the expression on her face was not anger. It looked like sincere regret. "I'm so sorry," she said. Then she turned around and walked away. She did not ask where John had gone. She did not check the address. She did not explain who she was. She simply left. I watched her for only a moment before closing the door. Then I locked it. The whole encounter had lasted only a few minutes, but it left me deeply unsettled. I began checking the rest of the house. I locked the back entrance. I made sure the windows were secured. I checked every door, even ones I rarely used. The woman's sudden change disturbed me more than the angry demand. At first, she had seemed completely certain that John was inside. Then, without receiving any new information, She appeared to understand that he was not there. It was almost as if she had briefly mistaken my house for another place and then returned to herself. I considered calling someone. There was not much to report. A strange woman had knocked on my door looking for someone who did not live there. She had not threatened me. She had not tried to enter. She had apologized and left. Police would probably have treated it as a mistaken address or a person in crisis. I also remembered the dead rat near the back gate. For the first time, I wondered whether the two events might be connected. Someone had placed an animal inside a chalk diagram beside the entrance I usually used. Then, a woman appeared at the front door demanding to speak to a man who did not exist. The connection was not logical, but the timing bothered me. I tried not to think about it. Despite being frightened, I was still exhausted from drinking earlier. After checking the locks, I somehow managed to fall asleep again. When I woke a couple of hours later, I was sober. The strange details of the day felt sharper. The house no longer seemed comfortable. I kept thinking about the woman standing outside, looking at me through her matted hair. I remembered the way her voice changed when she repeated that she needed to speak to John. I also remembered the rat. I decided I needed to leave the house for a while. There was a neighborhood dive bar nearby. Going to have another drink was probably not the healthiest choice, but it was New Orleans, and sitting somewhere around other people felt better than remaining alone in the house. I collected my things and went toward the back gate. As I approached it, I remembered the dead rat lying outside. I stopped. I had promised myself I would deal with it later, and now, later had arrived. I did not want to leave it there overnight. It would begin to smell, attract insects, or draw other animals. I opened the gate carefully and looked down. The rat was gone. At first, I assumed an animal had taken it. A cat, raccoon, or other rat could have dragged it away. Perhaps someone walking past had removed it. But then I saw the chalk. The original circle and diagram were no longer there. In their place, someone had drawn a peace symbol. It was positioned where the dead rat had been. I stood at the gate, staring at it. The change felt deliberate. The rat had not simply disappeared. Someone had returned to the exact spot. They had removed the body and altered the chalk drawing. The peace symbol looked like a message, although I had no idea what it was supposed to mean. Was it an apology? A reassurance? A joke? Had the original arrangement been a prank that someone decided to clean up? Maybe the symbol was meant to show that there was no threat. Or perhaps it had a meaning known only to the person who drew it. I looked around the driveway and street. No one was nearby. The area was quiet. I wondered whether someone had watched me step over the rat earlier. They could have seen me enter the house and later return to remove it. Maybe the woman had been involved. Perhaps she had left the rat and returned to ask for John. But that theory made little sense. Why would she apologize and leave? Why replace the diagram with a peace symbol? I did not know whether John had anything to do with the house. It was possible someone by that name had lived there before me. Maybe the rat and chalk markings were meant for him. The woman could have believed he still lived at the address. When I told her he was gone, she may have realized she had targeted the wrong person. Then someone removed the rat and replaced the original symbol with the peace sign as a way of ending whatever had been intended. That was one interpretation. It was also possible that none of the events were connected. The rat may have been placed there by local kids trying to frighten someone. The woman might have confused my house with another address. A different person could have removed the rat and drawn the peace symbol. New Orleans is full of unusual people, traditions, street art, rituals, and private jokes that make sense only to those involved. 3 unrelated events could easily happen on the same day. Still, the sequence felt too neat. A dead animal appeared inside a chalk diagram at the entrance I used. I ignored it and went inside. A woman came to the other entrance, demanding to speak to John. When I refused, she suddenly became calm and apologized. Hours later, the rat and diagram were gone. A peace symbol had replaced them. I went to the bar. I do not remember telling anyone there what happened. At the time, I probably worried that the story would sound ridiculous. I had been drinking when I first saw the rat. I had woken from a nap when the woman arrived. My perception may not have been perfect. Someone could easily have said I misread the chalk markings or exaggerated the woman's appearance. Maybe the diagram was only random graffiti around an animal that happened to die there. Maybe the peace symbol had already been part of it, and I had failed to notice it while drunk. But I remembered the original circle clearly enough. The rat had been in the center. There were organized lines beneath it. The later symbol looked different and cleaner. Something had changed while I slept. Afterward, I asked around casually about anyone named John who might have lived in the house. I never found a clear answer. Perhaps I did not ask the right people. Rental properties change occupants frequently, and records were especially confusing in the years after Katrina. People had relocated. Homes had been abandoned, repaired, rented, or sold. Someone named John could easily have lived there before me without leaving any trace I would recognize. I have wondered whether the woman was searching for a specific former resident. Maybe she had once visited the house regularly and did not know he had moved. Her anger might have been frustration or confusion. When she finally understood, she apologized. That explanation is ordinary and believable. Her appearance may have seemed more frightening because I had just woken up and was alone. The greasy hair, the intense stare, and the harsh voice could have belonged to someone having a very difficult day. The peace symbol could also have a normal explanation. A neighbor may have noticed the rat and disposed of it. Someone might have drawn the symbol over the previous markings because they disliked what had been placed there. A person walking past could have cleaned up the dead animal and added the sign as a comment. The original diagram may have been part of a ritual, but rituals are performed by people. Nothing supernatural needs to be involved. New Orleans has many spiritual and religious traditions, and outsiders often misunderstand what they see. A chalk circle and animal remains do not automatically mean something evil. It could have been an offering, a private ceremony, or a symbolic act unrelated to me. The rat might not even have been killed for the purpose. Someone may have found it already dead. I do not want to claim that I was cursed or targeted. I have no evidence for that. Nothing terrible happened to me afterward. The woman never returned. No more animals appeared at the gate. I did not hear strange voices or see figures inside the house. The event ended with the peace symbol. If anything, that final image seemed less threatening than what had been there before. But it did not make me feel peaceful. It made the entire day feel planned. Someone had completed a sequence I did not understand. I often think about the woman's exact words. I need to speak to John. Not, does John live here? Not, is John home? She spoke as though she knew he was inside and I was preventing her from reaching him. Then, after I denied it again, she said, John's not here. The statement sounded like a realization rather than a question. She looked genuinely sorry. Sometimes I wonder whether she had been speaking to me at all. Maybe she was repeating something she had been told. Perhaps she was in a confused state and believed she was somewhere else. When she looked at my face closely, reality returned. That could explain the sudden shift. But there was another possibility I tried not to consider. What if she expected someone named John to be in the house because of whatever had been left at the back gate? Maybe the rat and chalk diagram were not directed at me. Maybe they were meant to call, identify, or communicate with someone. She came to see whether it had worked. When she realized John was not there, she understood that something had gone wrong. The apology may not have been for disturbing my nap. It may have been for involving the wrong house. That idea is probably nonsense. It combines unrelated details into a supernatural story because the events were strange and happened close together. Human beings naturally look for patterns. I had seen an unsettling object, met an unsettling person, and found a strange symbol afterward. My mind connected them. Still, the memory refuses to separate. I cannot think about the woman without remembering the dead rat. I cannot picture the peace symbol without hearing her say John's name. I also wonder who removed the animal. The backyard gate was not in a busy public area. Someone had to approach the exact place and handle the body. If the person responsible for the original circle returned, they must have done so while I was inside. Did they know I was sleeping? Had they been watching the house? Could they see the front door when the woman arrived? Maybe the woman herself walked around the property after leaving me. She might have removed the rat and changed the symbol. There was enough time. But why? If she had placed it there, why become angry about John? Why apologize? If she had not placed it there, why would she know to remove it? I never saw her again. That is another detail that stays with me. She did not appear at neighboring houses asking for John. At least I did not see her do so. She walked away from my front door and disappeared from my life completely. Her image remains vivid because there was no later encounter to make her ordinary. She exists in my memory only as the woman with black hair hanging across her face, demanding someone who did not live with me. The house never felt quite the same after that day. I continued living there, but I became more careful about the gate. Whenever I came home, I checked the ground before stepping through. I half expected to find another animal inside a circle. Sometimes I looked for fresh chalk marks on the pavement. Nothing appeared. The peace symbol eventually faded. Rain and foot traffic wore it down until it was no longer visible. By then, the rat was long gone and the woman had not returned. The entire event became easy to treat as one bizarre day in New Orleans. There are countless stories in that city that sound impossible outside its boundaries. People do strange things. Coincidences happen. Alcohol makes memories less reliable. Post-Katrina New Orleans was especially disordered, with displaced residents, damaged homes, and people trying to rebuild lives that no longer fit where they once had. Maybe John had lived there before the storm. Maybe the woman had known him. Perhaps she returned to an address she remembered and discovered that someone else now occupied it. The rat and chalk diagram could have had nothing to do with her. That is the explanation I prefer. It is sad and strange, but not supernatural. Even so, there is one part I cannot make feel ordinary. When the woman first stood at the door, she seemed angry with me. When she left, she seemed sorry for me. Then, the symbol at the gate changed from something I could not understand into a sign commonly associated with peace. It looked almost like someone had corrected a mistake. I still do not know who John was. I do not know who placed the rat in the chalk circle. I do not know who removed it. Maybe nothing supernatural happened. Maybe I witnessed several unrelated pieces of someone else's life and mistakenly combined them. But I remember opening that gate after waking, expecting to find the same dead animal I had stepped over earlier. Instead, the rat was gone. The diagram had been erased or covered. And in the exact place where the body had been, someone had left a peace symbol. As though whatever had come to my house had finally understood that John was not there. My family and I used to visit a house up in the mountains fairly often. It was one of those places that felt completely separated from ordinary life. The nearest houses were far away, the roads were quiet, and the property was surrounded by open plains and dense sections of forest. There was very little traffic, no shops nearby, no people walking past. Once you arrived, it felt as though the rest of the world had disappeared behind the hills. I loved it there. The isolation did not frighten me back then. It was one of the things I liked most about the place. I could leave the house and walk through the grass for a long time without meeting anyone. The plains stretched out around the property, broken only by small hills, patches of flowers, and the dark tree line in the distance. It was peaceful. The wind moved through the grass in slow waves, and most of the sounds came from birds or insects. I often went walking alone. My parents knew I stayed fairly close to the house, even if I sometimes wandered farther than they probably realized. There was no reason for them to worry. We knew the area. The few neighbors who lived nearby were familiar to us, and the mountain was not a popular place for strangers to visit. Nothing dangerous had ever happened during my walks. One afternoon, I went out onto the plains as usual. The weather was calm, and I remember feeling relaxed. I walked far enough from the house that it looked smaller behind me, though I could still find my way back without difficulty. Eventually, I found a comfortable place in the grass and sat down. There was a small hill behind me. It was not especially steep or large, just high enough to block my view of whatever might be on the other side. I paid no attention to it. I sat facing the open land and began playing with the flowers growing around me. I picked at the stems, pulled apart petals, and watched insects moving through the grass. There was nothing unusual about the afternoon. For a while, I was completely absorbed in what I was doing. Then I heard something behind me. It was a very soft, rustling sound. At first, I assumed it was the wind. The grass was tall enough to make noise whenever a breeze passed through it. But after listening for a few seconds, I realized the sound did not match the movement around me. The grass in front of me was nearly still. The rustling behind the hill came in short, uneven movements, as though something was slowly pushing through the plants. I stopped touching the flowers. The sound stopped, too. I waited. Nothing happened. I told myself it was probably a small animal. There were rabbits, foxes, and other wildlife in the area. Something could have been moving along the other side of the hill without knowing I was there. Then the rustling began again. It seemed closer. I turned around. The moment I saw it, I felt the color drain from my face. A small black animal was standing near the hill, looking directly at me. At first, I thought it was a dog. Its general shape was canine, but it was smaller than most dogs I knew. It was larger than an average house cat, though not by much. Its body was thin, far too thin. I could see the shape of its ribs beneath its skin. Its legs looked narrow, and its coat was short, dark, and uneven. For a second, I thought it might be a stray puppy. Then, I saw its condition more clearly. The animal was covered in injuries. There were scars across its body. Some looked old and pale. Others appeared fresh. I could see what looked like bite marks along its side and shoulders. Parts of its fur were missing, exposing damaged skin beneath. There was blood on it. Not enough to suggest it was bleeding to death in front of me, but enough that I could see dark, wet patches against the black coat. The animal looked as though it had survived repeated attacks. Maybe it had been fighting other dogs. Maybe something larger had tried to kill it. Its face was even worse. Its eyes appeared completely black. I could not see any white around them, or any normal reflection from the daylight. They looked like two dark openings. Its mouth was slightly open. Inside, I could see long teeth. They did not look like the teeth of a dog that size. The fangs seemed too large and too sharp, extending farther than I expected. I remember staring at them and thinking that if the animal attacked me, it could do serious damage. I stayed completely still. Every instinct told me not to run. I knew enough about animals to understand that sudden movement might cause it to chase. Even a normal, frightened dog could become aggressive if it felt cornered. This animal was injured, starving, and possibly sick. I did not know whether it had rabies. I did not know whether it belonged to anyone. I only knew that I was far from the house, and no one was close enough to help me quickly. The animal did not growl. It did not bark. It made no sound at all. It simply stared at me. I stared back. For what felt like several minutes, neither of us moved. The wind shifted through the grass around us, but the animal remained completely motionless. Its body looked tense, as though it could spring forward without warning. I tried not to look directly into its eyes for too long because I worried it might interpret that as a challenge. At the same time, I was afraid to look away. I watched its shoulders and front legs, searching for any sign that it was preparing to attack. It seemed to be studying me in the same way. There was something unsettling about the silence. An injured stray dog might whine. A frightened one might lower its head or back away. An aggressive one might bare its teeth and growl. This animal did none of those things. It stood there with its mouth slightly open and its black eyes fixed on me. I became aware of how far I was from the house. If I screamed, my family might not hear me. Even if they did, it would take time for them to reach me. The animal was close enough to attack before I could stand properly. I considered throwing something toward it. There were no rocks within easy reach, only grass and flowers. Throwing anything might provoke it anyway. I thought about slowly standing. I was afraid that movement would break whatever uneasy balance existed between us, so I remained seated. My legs began to ache. My hands were pressed against the ground, and I could feel them trembling. The animal's wounds disturbed me almost as much as its teeth. Some of the marks looked like they had come from another animal's mouth. I wondered what could have bitten it so many times without killing it. A pack of dogs might have attacked it. Wild animals could have done the same. But if it had survived something violent enough to leave those scars, I had no reason to believe it would be harmless toward me. Its thinness suggested it had not eaten properly in a long time. That made me wonder whether it saw me as food. The thought was probably irrational. The animal was not large enough to hunt a person, but I was young, alone, and sitting on the ground. It did not need to kill me to hurt me badly. The staring continued. Time moved strangely. It may have been less than a minute. It may have been several. I remember the moment as long and stretched out, with nothing in the world except the animal, the grass, and the distance between us. Then, without warning, it turned away. It did not slowly retreat while watching me. It simply turned its back. For a moment, I saw the full extent of its injuries along its sides. Then, it ran. The speed was shocking. 1 second, it was standing still. The next, it shot across the grass toward the forest. It moved more like a wild deer than an injured dog. Its legs seemed barely to touch the ground. It covered the open space with incredible speed and disappeared between the trees. I remained where I was. I expected it to come back. The forest swallowed it so completely that I could no longer see any movement. There was no crashing through branches, no barking, no rustling that allowed me to follow its path. It was simply gone. I sat in the grass for a while longer, trying to calm down. My heart was pounding. My body felt weak, and I did not trust myself to stand immediately. I kept looking toward the tree line. Every dark gap between the trunks looked like a place where the animal might be watching me. Eventually, I forced myself to get up. I did not run back to the house because I worried that sudden movement might attract it again. Instead, I walked quickly. I looked over my shoulder every few steps. Nothing followed me. When I reached the house, I told my parents what had happened. I described the small, black animal. I said it looked like a dog, but was badly injured, covered in blood, scars, and bite marks. I told them about its black eyes and the strange fangs. I explained that it had stared at me for a long time before running into the forest. They were concerned that I had been close to an unfamiliar animal, but they did not react as though anything impossible had happened. They assumed I had seen a normal stray dog. Maybe it had been abandoned. Perhaps it had been attacked by another animal and wandered onto the property looking for food. They told me not to worry too much, though I should stay away if I saw it again. That explanation was reasonable. The problem was that the animal did not resemble any dog from the area. The nearest neighbor owned 3 dogs. I knew them. They were much larger, with white and brown fur. Their coats were thick and fluffy, nothing like the short black coat of the creature I saw. All 3 were healthy and well cared for. None of them had the scars or injuries I remembered. It was definitely not one of those dogs. There were no other nearby homes with animals that could easily wander onto the plains. The mountain was more isolated than my parents seemed to remember. The forest the animal entered was not a normal residential woodland with houses hidden inside it. It was a tree farm. The land had been divided into many small sections, perhaps around 100. A company planted and managed the trees, cutting down one section each year before allowing it to regrow. There were no houses on that entire side of the mountain. No cabins, no farms, no one living secretly among the trees. Workers visited when necessary, but the forest was otherwise empty. An animal could certainly survive there. Wildlife moved through it all the time. But a domestic dog in that condition raised questions. If it belonged to someone, where was its owner? How had it reached the property? The path my family used was the only practical way to approach the house without a very long hike. We had not seen any visitors arrive. There were no unfamiliar cars. No one had walked past the house with a dog. Reaching the area from another direction would have taken hours, perhaps 5 or more, depending on the route. It was not impossible. A lost or abandoned dog could travel a great distance, but the animal looked as if it had been living through something terrible for a long time. I wondered whether it had been trapped in the forest. Maybe it had survived by hunting small animals. Perhaps the scars came from fights with foxes or other wild creatures. Its speed suggested it was still physically strong, despite looking starved. That explanation covered many details. It did not explain the eyes. I know black dogs can appear to have completely dark eyes, especially from a distance. The shape of the face, shadows, and dark fur can hide the whites. Fear can also change what a person notices. Once I saw the blood and teeth, my mind may have exaggerated everything else. The fangs might have been normal canine teeth made more visible because the animal's lips were pulled back. Its wounds could have distorted its face. I understand all of that, but I was not looking at it for only a second. We watched each other for a long time. I had time to study it. The eyes remained completely black. The teeth remained too long. Even its body proportions seemed slightly wrong. It was close enough to be recognizable as a dog, yet strange enough that I could not fully accept that description. I sometimes wondered whether it had been a sick fox. A fox with mange can lose most of its fur and look very different from a healthy animal. Its body can appear thin and dog-like. Skin disease can create sores and bleeding. A fox's teeth might seem unusually sharp to a frightened child, That is a strong possibility. But the animal was completely black, and its shape did not look like the foxes I had seen before. It also seemed larger and heavier. A young wild boar was another possibility, though the legs, face, and movement did not fit. Maybe it was a feral dog mixed with some wild breed. Perhaps starvation and injury made it appear unnatural. The more I tried to identify it, the less certain I became. What disturbed me most was the contrast between its condition and its speed. The animal looked close to death. Its ribs were visible. Blood covered parts of its body. The scars and bite marks suggested it had endured repeated violence. Yet when it chose to run, it moved faster than any injured dog should have been able to move. There was no limp, no hesitation. It crossed the field like a healthy deer being chased. Then it disappeared into the trees without making enough noise for me to track it. My family never saw it. The neighbors never reported a missing dog. No one came looking for an injured animal. I never found a body in the forest or on the plains. There were no later sightings. The creature appeared once, stared at me, and vanished. That should make the explanation simpler. A wandering animal passed through the area and continued moving. It may have traveled far away before anyone else had a chance to see it. The mountain was large enough for an animal to disappear. Still, I kept expecting some trace of it. Tracks, blood in the grass. A report from a neighbor. Something. There was nothing. For a while after that day, I stopped walking so far from the house. The plains no longer felt completely peaceful. Every rustling sound behind a hill made me turn around. I watched the forest more carefully. Sometimes I thought I saw a small dark shape moving between the trees, but it was always a shadow or an ordinary animal. I never saw the black creature again. Eventually, I began taking walks alone as before. The fear faded, though it never disappeared completely. That place remained beautiful. The grass still moved in the wind. The flowers still grew across the plains. The forest still looked calm from a distance, but I could no longer believe I knew everything that lived there. Years later, I still returned to the same practical explanations. It was probably a stray dog. Maybe it had escaped from someone traveling through the region. Perhaps it survived an attack and wandered for days before reaching the mountain. The wounds made it look more unnatural than it really was. Fear affected my memory. Those are all believable possibilities. I do not need the creature to have been supernatural. A starving, wounded dog in the middle of nowhere is frightening enough. But that explanation creates its own questions. How did it survive those injuries? What had attacked it? Why did no one else see it? Where did it go after entering the tree farm? And why did an animal that looked barely alive move with such impossible speed? Sometimes I think it may have been watching me before I heard it. The small hill blocked my view, but it could have approached quietly from behind. Perhaps it stood there for several minutes while I played with the flowers. The rustling may have happened only when it moved closer. That means the creature had enough time to attack me without warning. Instead, it allowed me to turn around. It stood still and waited. I cannot decide whether that makes the encounter better or worse. Maybe it was as frightened of me as I was of it. An injured animal would naturally freeze when noticed. It may have been deciding whether I was a threat. When I remained still, it chose to leave. That is normal animal behavior. Yet, I did not see fear in its posture. I saw attention. It felt less like an animal trapped by a human and more like two things recognizing each other across the grass. The creature seemed to be studying me. When it had looked long enough, it turned and ran. I often wonder what would have happened if I had moved first, if I had stood suddenly. Would it have attacked? If I had tried to approach, would it have let me? What if I had screamed? Maybe it would have run away immediately. Maybe it would have closed the distance between us before anyone at the house heard me. I am glad I never found out. The incident did not involve a ghost, a voice, or anything obviously impossible. There was no vanishing figure or unexplained object. I saw an animal. Animals can become injured. They can travel far from their owners. They can behave strangely when sick or starving. Everything I witnessed could have a natural explanation. But sometimes reality is frightening precisely because it almost makes sense. The creature looked enough like a dog for everyone to dismiss it. It was only a stray, only an injured animal, only something lost in the mountains. But I remember the black eyes. I remember the blood and the bite marks. I remember the teeth inside its partly open mouth. And I remember how quickly something that looked half dead crossed the field. The forest it entered was supposed to be empty. No houses existed on that side of the mountain. No one claimed the animal. No one ever saw it again. For all I know, it was only a wounded dog that had wandered farther than anyone believed possible. But sometimes I still picture it standing behind that hill, completely silent, watching me through eyes with no visible color. What frightens me now is not only where it came from. It is the possibility that it had been living in that empty forest for a very long time. And on that particular afternoon, it came out only because it had noticed me sitting alone. I was about 7 or 8 years old when this happened, and even now I still cannot explain what floated past me outside my bedroom door. My family lived in a large 2-story house. My parents' bedroom was upstairs, along with most of the main living areas. My brother and I had the only 2 bedrooms downstairs, in the underground part of the house. It was not exactly a basement in the usual sense. The lower level was finished and used as part of the home, but being underground gave it a different feeling from the rest of the house. Upstairs always seemed brighter. There were more windows, more natural light, and usually more people moving around. You could hear the television, the kitchen, conversations, and the normal activity of the family. Downstairs was quieter. The windows were smaller, and less sunlight reached the hallway. Even during the day, parts of the lower floor could feel dim. The walls seemed colder, and sounds traveled differently underground. My brother and I were used to it because our rooms had always been there. We did not spend every day frightened of the lower level. It was simply where we slept, kept our things, and played. Still, being alone downstairs felt different from having someone nearby. If my brother was in his room, I knew I could call for him. If people were moving upstairs, I could hear the occasional footsteps above me. But when the lower floor was empty except for me, the silence became much more noticeable. On the day this happened, my brother was not home. I do not remember exactly where he had gone. He may have been out with friends, at school, or somewhere else with family. The important part is that I knew he was not downstairs. As far as I understood, I was the only person on that entire level of the house. My mother was upstairs. I was in my bedroom playing. I do not remember what I was playing with. At that age, I had toys, games, and different things scattered around the room. I could entertain myself for long periods without needing anyone else. The day felt ordinary. I was not thinking about ghosts or anything supernatural. I had not heard a strange sound, and nothing had happened earlier to make me nervous. At some point, I needed to use the bathroom. The downstairs bathroom was outside my bedroom, so I stopped playing and walked toward the door. My bedroom door was open, or I opened it as I approached. I stepped toward the hallway without expecting to see anything unusual. Then a large white cloud floated directly past my face. It appeared so suddenly that I had no time to understand what I was looking at. The cloud was approximately 2 feet tall and about 1 foot wide. It was not a faint mist spread across the hallway. It had a clear, concentrated shape. The white mass passed in front of me at about the height of my face and upper body. It was close enough that I could see its thickness and movement. It floated from one side of the doorway to the other. Then it disappeared behind the opposite side of my bedroom door. For a moment, I remained completely still. My mind could not process what had just happened. There had been nothing in front of me. Then a white shape appeared, crossed the doorway, and vanished. It moved calmly, almost as if it were traveling through the hallway with a purpose. It did not shoot upward toward the ceiling. It did not fall toward the floor. It moved sideways. That was one of the strangest details. Smoke normally rises. Steam spreads and becomes thinner. Dust falls or moves with the air. This cloud floated past me horizontally. It was also much larger and denser than any small amount of smoke I had seen before. I could not see through the middle of it clearly. The edges were soft, but the main shape seemed thick enough to block part of the hallway behind it. There was no smell. At least, I do not remember any. If it had been cigarette smoke, I should have smelled tobacco immediately. Cigarette smoke has a strong, recognizable smell that remains in the air and sticks to clothing, walls, and furniture. I smelled nothing like that. The cloud also did not move like cigarette smoke. When someone exhales smoke, it usually curls, twists, and rises. It breaks into thin streams as it spreads through the room. What I saw stayed together. It looked almost like a small section of a cloud from the sky had somehow entered the house. It passed close enough to my face that I should have felt air or moisture. I do not remember feeling either. There was no cold wind, no heat, no dampness against my skin. The shape simply moved past me. Then it was gone. The moment it disappeared behind the door, fear hit me. I did not go looking for it. I did not step into the hallway to see whether it had entered my brother's room or moved toward the bathroom. I turned and ran upstairs. I moved as fast as I could. The stairs suddenly felt much longer than usual. I remember climbing quickly, afraid that the cloud might follow me or appear again behind my back. I did not look over my shoulder. I did not want to see it floating up the staircase after me. When I reached the main floor, I found my mother and told her what had happened. I was frightened and probably had trouble explaining it clearly. I told her I had seen a large white cloud pass in front of my bedroom door. She suggested that it might have been cigarette smoke. That was the most ordinary explanation she could think of. Maybe someone had been smoking downstairs, and the smoke had drifted through the hallway. But that explanation did not make sense to me. My brother was the only person in the family who later began smoking, but this happened long before he started. He was not even home that day. No one should have been downstairs smoking. My mother did not smoke there. There were no visitors in the lower level. I had been alone. Even if someone upstairs had been smoking, the smoke would not have traveled down into the underground hallway as one large, solid cloud. It would have spread through the air. It would have had a smell. It would have curled and risen toward the ceiling. The white shape I saw did none of those things. I tried to explain that to my mother. But I was a young child describing something impossible. From her point of view, I had probably seen dust, smoke, or a trick of the light. Adults naturally search for normal explanations when children report strange experiences. I understand that now. At the time, however, her answer did not make me feel safe. If it was not cigarette smoke, then what had I seen? I stayed upstairs for the rest of the day. I did not want to return to my bedroom. The idea of going back through that doorway made my stomach tighten. The cloud had disappeared on the other side of the door, but I did not know where it went after that. It might have remained inside my room. It could have moved into the hallway. Maybe it had entered my brother's bedroom or gone toward the bathroom. The worst thought was that it might still be waiting somewhere downstairs. I imagined returning to my room and seeing it floating near the ceiling. I imagined it hiding beside the door where I could not see it until I stepped inside. I knew a cloud could not hide in the normal sense, but what I had seen did not behave normally. That made every possibility feel real. When night came, I refused to sleep downstairs. I did not want to be in my bedroom after dark. The lower level had always seemed dim, but now it felt occupied. Every shadow in the hallway reminded me of the white cloud. Every small sound from below made me think it had returned. I stayed upstairs that night. I do not remember exactly where I slept. It may have been on a sofa, in my parents' room, or somewhere else on the main floor. Wherever it was, I felt safer because other people were nearby. The next day, I still did not want to go downstairs. My family probably thought I would forget about the incident after one night. I did not. I avoided my bedroom and the entire lower floor for about a week. That created problems because my clothes, toys, and personal things were still in my room. If I needed something, I wanted someone to come with me. I did not walk downstairs alone. If my mother or another family member went with me, I moved quickly, grabbed what I needed, and came back upstairs. I kept watching the doorway where the cloud had appeared. Nothing happened. The hallway looked normal. There was no white mist, no smell of smoke, and no mark on the walls. In daylight, the lower floor seemed exactly the same as before. That should have reassured me. Instead, the normal appearance made the event harder to understand. If there had been a leak, steam, smoke damage, or some physical source, we might have found evidence. There was nothing. No pipe had burst. No appliance downstairs was producing steam. There had not been a fire. There were no vents releasing white vapor. The cloud seemed to have appeared without a source and disappeared without leaving anything behind. After several days, I eventually returned to sleeping in my room. I had no real choice. It was my bedroom, and I could not avoid it forever. The first few nights were difficult. I kept the door open so I could see the hallway. Then I worried that leaving it open would allow the cloud to float inside. If I closed it, I imagined the white shape gathering on the other side, waiting for me to open it. There was no option that felt completely safe. I looked around the room before getting into bed. I checked behind the door, inside the closet, and near the dresser. I looked toward the ceiling for any trace of mist. There was nothing. I tried to sleep, but every normal house sound made me alert. The underground walls sometimes produced small creaks. Pipes clicked. Footsteps upstairs sounded distant and heavy through the ceiling. Each noise made me wonder whether something was moving through the lower hallway. I expected the cloud to appear again. It never did. That was the only time I saw it. Years passed, and I became less frightened of the room. Eventually, I could sleep downstairs without thinking about the incident every night. But I never completely forgot it. The memory stayed because the image was so clear and unusual. I remember the exact size of the cloud. I remember how close it came to my face. I remember the smooth, sideways movement. I remember watching it disappear beyond the door. Most childhood memories lose detail. You remember that something happened, but the images become vague. You might forget the room, the time of day, or exactly how an object looked. This memory remains sharp. I can still picture the white shape crossing the doorway. I have tried to give myself normal explanations. Dust is one possibility. A large amount of dust can become visible when sunlight hits it at the right angle. If someone disturbed an old blanket, carpet, or piece of furniture, a pale cloud might move through the room. But I had not been cleaning or shaking anything. I had only been playing. The cloud also seemed too white and solid to be dust. Dust particles sparkle or drift separately when light passes through them. They do not usually form one thick shape that travels horizontally for several feet. Steam is another possibility. Perhaps hot water from the bathroom produced vapor that entered the hallway. But I had not yet used the bathroom. No one else was downstairs. Steam would have been warmer, thinner, and less defined. It also should have come from the bathroom, not past my bedroom door or in the direction I saw. A humidifier could produce a white mist, but we did not have one operating in the hallway. The shape did not appear to come from any machine. Smoke remains the explanation my mother suggested. Maybe someone had smoked downstairs earlier, and a pocket of smoke remained trapped in still air before moving through the doorway. That seems extremely unlikely. Smoke does not usually remain in one dense block without spreading. There would also have been a smell. I knew what cigarette smoke smelled like, and this had none of it. My brother was absent, and this happened before he began smoking anyway. There was no reason for tobacco smoke to be there. Another explanation is that my eyes created the image. Maybe I had looked at something bright and then saw an afterimage when I moved toward the dark hallway. Visual afterimages can appear as floating shapes or patches of color. But an afterimage would move with my eyes. It would not seem to pass behind a physical door. What I saw appeared to occupy real space. It crossed in front of the doorway and disappeared only when the wall or door blocked my view. That detail made it feel external rather than something inside my vision. It might also have been a reflection. Light from upstairs or a window could have moved across the wall as someone passed outside. But the shape did not appear flat against the surface. It looked three-dimensional. It floated in the air, close enough that I believed I could have reached out and touched it. There were no car headlights or moving mirrors downstairs that could have created it. The cloud was too low and too close. As I grew older, I began hearing stories about people seeing white mist or fog inside houses. Some interpreted it as a spirit or some kind of paranormal energy. Others believe it is a natural effect caused by temperature, moisture, dust, or vision. I do not know which explanation applies to my experience. I did not see a person inside the cloud. There was no face, no arms, and no clear human shape. It was simply a white mass. That almost makes it more difficult to understand. If it had looked like a ghost from a film, I might have blamed imagination. If it had formed the shape of a person, I could say my young mind created a figure from random smoke. But the cloud had no familiar form. It looked like exactly what it was. A small, dense cloud floating inside the house. Sometimes I wonder whether it was moving toward my bedroom or away from it. At the time, I only noticed it crossing the doorway. If it came from my room, then it may have been inside with me while I was playing. That thought still makes me uncomfortable. How long had it been there before I stood up? Could it have been floating behind me while I sat on the floor? Maybe it had been near the ceiling or in a corner where I had not noticed it. Then, when I walked toward the door, it moved past me and left. If it was moving into my room, the idea is equally disturbing. Perhaps it crossed my face and entered the space I had just left. If I had turned around instead of running upstairs, would I have seen it floating over my toys? Would it have disappeared into the wall? Would it have changed shape? I am glad I did not follow it. There is also the question of why I saw it at that moment. Nothing similar happened before or after. The house may have been old enough to have a history, but I do not remember hearing many paranormal stories about it. My experience seemed isolated. That makes it easy to dismiss as a childhood misunderstanding. Children see the world differently. They have less experience with unusual light, vapor, and shadows. Something ordinary can appear impossible when you do not know what causes it. I accept that. But I also know how frightened I became the instant I saw it. The fear was not created later. I did not first think it was normal, and then convince myself it had been a ghost. The moment the cloud passed my face, my body reacted as if something was deeply wrong. I ran upstairs without searching for an explanation. That reaction has stayed in the memory just as strongly as the image. Whatever I saw did not feel like harmless steam. It felt present. It felt as though it had moved past me rather than simply drifted with the air. There was something controlled in the way it crossed the doorway. Maybe that was only how my young mind interpreted it. Still, the movement did not seem random. The cloud kept its form. It traveled in a straight direction. Then it disappeared. For a full week, I avoided sleeping downstairs because I believed it might return. No one could convince me that cigarette smoke had passed through my room without a smoker, a smell, or any source. Eventually, time made the fear weaker. The lower floor became ordinary again. I grew older, and the house changed as our family changed. My brother eventually did begin smoking, long after the incident. By then, I had seen real cigarette smoke many times. Every time I watched it rise and curl, I became more certain that it did not resemble what I saw as a child. Cigarette smoke is thin. It twists in the air. It breaks apart. The cloud outside my bedroom was large, bright white, and strangely complete. It moved past me like one object. I still have no clue what it was. Maybe there is a scientific explanation I have never considered. Perhaps a sudden temperature difference created condensation in the cool underground hallway. Maybe dust and light combined in exactly the right way. Maybe my childhood memory has made the shape larger and clearer than it actually was. All of those things are possible. I would prefer one of them to be true. But when I remember that day, I do not picture smoke curling near the ceiling. I see a white cloud about 2 feet tall floating directly in front of my face. I see it cross the bedroom doorway. I see it disappear into the empty lower hallway where no one else was supposed to be. Then I remember running upstairs as quickly as I could, too afraid to look back. I did not sleep in that room for a week. Even now, years later, thinking about that white shape still sends a chill through me. It may have been smoke, it may have been mist, it may have been some strange effect of light that my young mind could not understand. But there was no smoker downstairs. There was no steam. There was no one else on that floor. There was only me, standing in my bedroom doorway, and a dense white cloud floating past my face as though it already knew where it was going. If you've stayed with me this far, then these stories didn't simply pass the time. They stayed with you. Everything you heard tonight was real. Real people. Real moments. And in each one, something quietly slipped out of place. If you'd like more of the kind that don't let go so easily, subscribe to Crowvane Manor. There are more rooms left open, and more stories waiting behind every door. I'm grateful you spent this part of your night here. Rest well, and I'll be waiting when you return.